Hello and welcome. Today's exciting episode is all about Fringe, the fringe on a Chanel style jacket to be precise, and how exactly I make mine.
It's perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Perfect jacket.
So there are a couple of different ways that you can trim your jacket, different ways you can make the fringe. So I will talk you through those. I've got a couple of different jackets out. Some of them I've made the fringe, handmade the fringe from all different yarns and things like that. And I've also have a couple where I've just cut up strips of the tweed, leftover tweed, deconstructed it a bit and then sewn it to the bottom of the jacket. But we'll start with this one here because, I love this one. It's got loads of beading on the top, and this is what the actual tweed looked like. And you can see it's got lots of different colourful yarns picked out in there. And you can't tell so much because of the heavy beading, but I actually have 3 jackets out of this tweed, and I decided to put fringe on one of them. There's maybe a dozen different types of yarns and wools in there. It took forever to make, but I think it really, some people looking at the jacket take a while to realize that it actually has fringe. So I take that as a compliment. I think it blends really well with the jacket. But it also, if you take the time to actually look at it, it's just loads of really unique yarns and threads mixed together, and I'm really proud of that one. It is a bit extra, but I like it. And this one here is the opposite. I just had a bit of extra tweed and I just pulled out, it's got warp and weft, so one goes horizontal and the other threads go vertical, and you just pull out the threads one way, leaving all the interesting ones there. And so that's 4 layers of tweed, deconstructed tweed in the fringe at the bottom. When you buy a jacket, normally they just do 1 layer because it's cheaper, obviously. 4 layers is very expensive. But I just think 4 looks better and 2 looks okay at a pinch. But I think 4 looks really good. So this is it from the front, the side and the back. I also have braids on that one, so that's what they are. And I love the beading on this one. It's supposed to look like a snow dump. So if you went to a log cabin in the woods and you stood on the porch and the snow fell down from the overhang, then that's what the beading is supposed to look like. Anyway, but the fringe is just 4 layers. And on this one, it's 2 layers. And it looks fine, but in my opinion, 4 layers is the best. And these are some other ones that I've made that I haven't used yet. So this is a Linton tweed, and one way, the warp is hot pink and the weft is a mix of whites and creams and beiges. So I just took out the hot pink and you're left with all the whites. If you wanted both types of colours represented in the piece, then you would obviously have to cut 2 different lengths, 2 different ways. So it's tricky getting what you want. You do have to buy extra fabric. This is a Chanel tweed, and I took out the white ones and left the colours, and it's a foot of 10 inches of fabric, and then I doubled it over and took out the threads from half of it but left the middle bit so that could be sewn to the jacket. That's the strongest way to do it in my opinion. But I mean, you are paying for nearly half a yard of fabric depending on how wide your jacket is. It does add up. So I thought when I was doing it, I was like, well, this is really expensive. Maybe it's cheaper to just buy some yarns and just make my own. So as you can see, I've done a mix of both. I think they both look good in their own ways. If you just want something minimal, then I think this is a really good way to go. Like, this is quite a conservative jacket. I make some of my jackets are made to wear to business meetings. So This is, just ignore the front inside panel. That's going to be part of the lining. So that's why it doesn't have fringe on it. The fringe is just on the outside. So that's what this one's going to look like. And as I said, it's 2 layers of the, and then you can see here, I've also sewn a layer of the tweed from the hem up. So once I finish the jacket, it's obviously going to have silk lining, and that's going to come down over the top of that. So instead of folding up an inch or an inch and a half of hem like you normally do when you are making a jacket, what you do is you sew the extra bit, the fringe and the bottom of the jacket all together, all 3 layers. Then you turn up this extra bit here and it covers all the raw edges of the seams, and then when you bring down the lining, the silk lining, that covers the raw edge of that. So it is a lot more complicated, but completely worth it in my opinion. And just using extra strip, like buying half a yard extra of fabric and just turning your extra fabric into strips and then pulling it apart a bit and making it into fringe, that's by far the easiest way to do fringe. You can, there's this weird dressmaking thing. Oh, in this footage, I'm just trying to show you the difference between 1 layer and 2 layers. 2 is so much better. Where dressmakers cut their, like they buy an extra yard of fabric, so expensive, if they're making 2 jackets for 2 different clients, and then they'll cut the extra yard up on the bias and pull it apart that way. That way they can charge both clients with for an extra yard of fabric. Yeah, so I don't think cutting it on the bias is good for anyone unless you're charging people. And if you technically do use fabric from that whole yard on one jacket and some of it on another jacket, technically I guess you can charge the clients, both clients, each for the 1 yard. Anyway, I don't agree with cutting fringe tweed on the bias. I just don't think it's right. I think it's good for dressmaking, but it's not what you should do to tweed, in my opinion. And if you don't want to, if you feel like just pulling apart the actual tweed isn't enough for you, you want something more complex, then you can always make your own. So this is a Chanel tweed, and Chanel tweed is super expensive. So yeah, you would feel like it would be cheaper to just buy a bunch of yarns and make your own. I don't think it was any cheaper, but it was definitely more fun. And I really love this fringe. I put so much time and effort into getting these colours to match the warp and the weft of that Chanel tweed. So this is just a couple of the yarns that I bought. So see this lime green here? It's actually a wool, hand-dyed wool from, there's a specific type of sheep in New Zealand. Anyway, I bought it in a store in a different country, but it was made in New Zealand, and it had all the details on the little packaging, but I threw away the packaging, so I'm sorry, I don't have any more information. And then I originally bought that ribbon yarn for one of my navy Chanels, but I didn't end up using it, so I might use it when I make my own tweed. And then there's some yarns, there's some metallics, there's some wools, there's a little flagged one in apricot and white, and I used a similar one in this, but I think it was a different size. And that wool with the little fringy bits is actually used in the one I just showed you. And this green olive one is ribbons. And yeah, so these are some of the ones that I handmade. And as you can see, there's just different, I really love a mix of textures, different types like ribbons, lace, metallics, threads. So there's some embroidery threads cut up in there as well. And this, I'm just got the spare bit of tweed out to show you what it's matching. And so I just pull all the different colours. So the actual tweed, this is an Italian wool, and it's like serrated, but one side has been screen printed with gold. It's just ridiculously the amount of detail in some of these ribbons and some of these wools, it's just amazing. But you can't actually see them from far away, but I feel like you can sort of subconsciously you can see how much detail there is in there. And this one is absolutely gorgeous. I ended up making this jacket without the fringe because I kind of decided what beading I'm going to do on that jacket, and it's just going to be too heavily beaded to have fringe on it, which is ridiculous because I just showed you the orange jacket with thousands of beads on it. But yeah, so I'm going to use this fringe on a I've got a sequin in silver, and yeah, I'm going to use that fringe on the bottom of the sequin jacket and then bead it with the same colours that are in the fringe. It's going to look good. And these are other ones that I've made, but they aren't attached to jackets yet. So obviously the tweed that inspired this one had sort of lots of beige and pale green in it. And this one, I think I'm actually going to show you the jacket that this one came from in a moment. But yeah, so basically I just bought loads of yarns, and every time I buy something from Chanel, I keep the ribbon, and then I use some of the ribbons. The thin ones you get when you buy an accessory, and the thick ones are from when you buy a piece of clothing or one of the value items. And yeah, so I use them in different things. So yeah, there's a huge range, and you just sort of have to... Obviously, I went a little bit overboard when I started making fringe. But yeah, so now I will show you how I made it. I'm not going to make a whole new one from scratch because I don't have that kind of time. But I'll show you how to work out how much of a fringe you need to make and how to make it, and then how to attach it. So this is the sequin jacket that I made recently from the Vogue 1536 pattern, and it's quite cropped, and it's a little too cropped for me. Like, I haven't turned up the hem yet. But, and every time I mention fringe, people ask me about trim. And whenever I talk about trim, people ask me about fringe. So there will be a separate video on trim. But with trim, you just need to use a bit of ribbon to measure around where you want your trim to go. With fringe, you need to measure the bottom of the... Oh, this is me just showing you the trim that I used on that one. So there'll be a separate video on trim. But with fringe, you need to measure the bottom of the jacket where the hemline is going to be. So not the very bottom, you've got to account for your seam allowance. So this is the jacket that the fringe I just showed you. This is the one I originally made it for, but I've decided I don't want fringe on that jacket. So this leaves me free to use it on this one here. And all my jackets obviously are the same size. So because it's cropped, it's a slightly different circumference. But yeah, we'll just pretend they're exactly the same for now. In my opinion, it's best to make your fringe an inch or two longer than it has to be, and then you can just turn in the ends, and that way if you change size and you want to alter your jacket, you just unpick the fringe, change the jacket, reattach the fringe. So what you need is a frame. So if you go to a hobby store or even Joann's, just go to the hobby section, and they sell cheap framed canvases, and you just cut off the canvas. It's cheaper than buying wood. And what you have to do is, so basically my jackets are a size 6, so they're quite small. So I can fit mine on a paint frame. But if you have a clothing rack that has 2 sturdy poles on it, all you need to do is you have to be able to tie something around it, and then hang a bunch of things off the tie. It'll make sense in a second. So anyway, you can see that my bit of fringe is shorter than the actual frame, so I can use a frame. So the first thing you do is get some thread, double it over, or get 4 bits of it and tie it round the whole thing. And then you have to work out how long you want your fringe to be. And see this Chanel ribbon here? That's about how long I want mine to be. If you want it shorter, then put your thread down closer to the end. And obviously you'd be working flat on a bench, but I'm trying to show you what to do. So I'm working with it stuck up on my sideboard, which obviously wouldn't be very practical, but it's easier to show you what we're doing. So we're just gauging where we're going to have our measurements. So you just need, like, it's 4 bits of cotton thick at the moment. It's not very thick. But once you've got the correct line, then you need to take your thread and cut like 10 bits and tie 10 bits around there. You need, or if you've got string, use that, but you need to have a really solid, really tight line. It can't be too tight because you don't want it to sort of spring, and it has to be just even, the right amount of tension. And once you've got those threads across the top, then you have to use your yarn. And instead of cutting each individual piece, I just wind my ball of yarn around the bottom. Then I go up around my bright orange thread. Then I bring it down around the edge of the canvas. And you just go along. And if you've ever made a pom-pom, you just sort of have to wind your yarn around the 2 sides. It's the same here. You've got the bottom of your canvas frame and the yarn bit, and you just wind each piece around. And as you can see, it's not in clumps. It's nice and even. So, and the gold isn't all on one level. It's some gold, then some green, then some cream. So you just do really thin layers. So you wind the beige along, and then you wind red along, then you wind orange along, then you go back and you wind, then you just start your colours again. And you go through and you just keep adding and adding until you feel like you've finally got enough. It does take forever, but I mean, once you make the jacket, you're actually going to have that forever as well. So I don't know, I feel like it's worth it. But when you finally got it to the bulk, the amount that you want, then you cut up some netting, and you just sort of have to put the netting on, pin it to the front, then pin it to the back. And this is going to keep everything in place because you finally have to cut it off your frame. And you just want to pin those there. And what I do is I go along and put 1 set of pins in. Then I go along and I put a second set of pins in. Because if it falls apart when you cut it down, you are going to have to do the whole thing again. So when it's laying flat on your workbench, obviously it's easy to turn around, and you could just hand stitch all of this down if you feel like the pins aren't going to be strong enough for you. Anyway, so once you're secure, that net at the top is secure and everything is secure, then you cut it off the bottom of the frame. You just go along and cut through every single bit of yarn and bit of ribbon so that it's just hanging on these bright orange threads at the top. And then you very, very, very carefully snip through one section of those. But you don't want that orange thread to run out of the fringe. You want it to stay there. You're just trying to cut it down off the frame. You're not trying to undo anything. So just be really careful when you do it. And then lay it down on your workbench, and that's it. You don't need the frame anymore. So get rid of the wooden frame. And now what you do is you machine sew your net, and you have to do this really carefully because you're basically setting it. So you do 1 set of machine sewing, and then you do another one, and then you do another one, especially if you've got really thin, like I use embroidery threads or metallic thread, and it's really fine. So you need those 3 or 4 rows of stitches at the top so that when someone comes along and tries to pull out threads, believe me, people are very badly behaved, then it won't wreck your jacket. Once you've done that, then you turn up the excess of the net, and so you have a nice clean line at the bottom, so you can see where my seam line is going to go. And then now that it's all done, you have to finally sew it onto the bottom of the jacket. Now with this one, all I'm going to do is turn the jacket upside down, pin the two together. But if you're working on like a Chanel style jacket, what you do is I've got a jacket here. That's the hemline of the jacket. And then you put the fringe on top. And then you put your other layer of tweed down. And if you see what I mean, it's a little confusing. But yeah. And then you pin them all together and see when you turn the fringe over, everything will be in the right order. And all the raw edges will be encased. If you see what I mean, yeah. If you do it a couple of times, you'll get it round the right order. I find it really confusing because you have to basically pin the fringe on upside down so that it then falls into the right place after it's been sewn. So I'll show you once again on this one. With this jacket, it's slightly different because the lining and the actual jacket on cropped jackets are the same length. So you don't need that extra strip of tweed for the inside. You just machine sew or hand sew the fringe to the outer jacket, and then you turn up the raw edge of the lining and you hand stitch that in. Now I'm going to bead this jacket and I can't have the fringe on while I'm beading it, so that's why I've just pinned it into place here, but you get the idea. And when I do actually do it, I'll film the whole process. But yeah, there you go. That is how you make fringe and how you attach it. It is rather complicated and it does cost a lot. But I mean, it's, if you're trying to make a luxurious jacket, it's not going to be cheap. I mean, there are fast fashion ways to do everything, obviously, but that's not really why I make things. Yeah, I just get so much joy out of these. They're just so complex, and you get to work with the most beautiful yarns and ribbons and threads. I just find it a joy. Don't get me wrong, there are moments of frustration, but you end up with these absolutely gorgeous creations, and I think it's worth it. So that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope it's been a little bit informative and you've been inspired to make fringe for your tweed jacket. Oh, this is the inside of the magenta Chanel one. So I've hand stitched up the top of the fringe, but I haven't put the strip across yet because I'm going to hand bead the whole jacket first. Then I'll put in that extra protective layer strip of fabric, and then I'll put in the lining. So yeah, it does add extra layers of complication, but I mean, look how well matched that fringe is to the warp and the weft of the Chanel tweed. I am so ridiculously happy with the way that this one turned out. I mean, it's gorgeous. This magenta Chanel tweed is just divine. So, I mean, I had the perfect inspiration. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Oh my gosh. I have invested so much time and money in these. It is ridiculous, but they are unique. They are incredibly unique. So, I mean, tick in that box, which is why I did them in the first place. The silver sequin jacket with that one is just going to look so spectacular. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Happy sewing.